They say that the people closest to you, your family, your blood, are the only ones you can truly trust. They are the ones who hold your secrets, share your victories, and carry you through the darkness. For 30 years, I believed that. I believed it right up until the afternoon I looked across the room at my own sister, Eleanor, and the reflection looking back at me was the face of a stranger, a smiling, beautiful monster. This is the story of how my sister's betrayal didn't just break my heart. It took my entire world, tore it down to the foundation, and forced me to rebuild it using the only tools I had left: truth and vengeance. My name is Clara, and Eleanor was my anchor. She was 4 years older, the responsible one, the brilliant one, the one who always knew how to fix things. We were inseparable. We shared a childhood bedroom, graduated from the same university, and even bought houses just 2 miles apart. People called us the duo. We were the perfect sisters, or so I thought. The perfect life for me started with Michael. He was everything I had ever dreamed of. Kind, driven, hilarious. Our engagement was the kind you see in movies. A quiet beach, sunset, a beautiful diamond, and the promise of forever. We set the date for 9 months out, giving us plenty of time to plan the elegant, sophisticated wedding we both wanted. Eleanor was, naturally, my maid of honor. She threw herself into the planning with an energy that actually relieved me. "Don't worry about the venue contracts, Clara," she'd say, her smile wide and encouraging. "I'll handle the caterer. You just focus on the dress and being happy." It felt like a gift. It felt like love. 3 months before the wedding, I was ecstatic. Everything was locked in. The invitations were out, the venue was secured, a stunning historic estate just outside the city. My dress was custom-fitted and waiting. Michael was working long hours, trying to get a big promotion finalized before the honeymoon, but every night he'd call, exhausted but happy. "We're almost there, Clary," he'd whisper, "just a few more weeks." Then the whispers started. It wasn't a sudden shock. It was a slow, creeping chill, like the heating was failing in our perfect little home. I noticed little things. Michael was always distracted. He started coming home later, but his excuses were vague. Big meeting ran over, had to take a client out. He was stressed, yes, but there was a nervousness in his eyes that wasn't about the promotion. And Eleanor, she was pulling away too. She stopped calling me about the seating charts. When I asked her a simple question about the floral arrangements, she snapped. "Can't you handle anything yourself, Clara? I have my own life." It was so unlike her. My supportive, devoted sister was suddenly cold and irritable. I tried to put it all down to wedding stress, the normal jitters, but one Tuesday afternoon, the chill turned into ice. I was working from home, editing a massive document, when I decided to take a break and go for a drive. I wasn't thinking, just driving. Habit took me toward the historic estate, our wedding venue. I wanted to see it again, maybe just walk the grounds and breathe in the promise of that day. I pulled up the long, winding drive. The gates were open. As I drove around the corner to the main house, I saw a familiar car parked right by the entrance. It was Eleanor's sleek black sedan. Odd, I thought. She said she was busy with work. I got out of my car, a curious knot forming in my stomach. The front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently, calling out, "Eleanor? Is everything okay?" The room was fast, usually silent, but now filled with a strange, low sound, a mix of laughter and intense whispers coming from the sunroom on the back of the house. I walked toward the sound, my heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached the archway and stopped dead, my breath caught in my throat, freezing every muscle in my body. The sunroom was bathed in soft afternoon light, and there they were, Eleanor and Michael. They weren't discussing floral arrangements. They weren't reviewing the menu. Michael was holding her hand, his head bowed close to hers, whispering something that made her laugh, a soft, intimate sound I had never heard from her before. And then he looked up, and his eyes met mine. The look on his face wasn't one of shock or guilt. It was absolute terror. Eleanor slowly turned. Her usually composed face crumbled, revealing a flicker of something truly ugly. Not just shame, but a hint of triumph, instantly masked by forced pity. "Clara, what is this?" Eleanor didn't offer an excuse. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She simply stood up, looked me straight in the eye, and said the words that would officially begin my new life. A life dedicated to justice. "It's the truth, Clara. It always has been." The world didn't explode. There was no crashing soundtrack. When Eleanor spoke that single, chilling sentence, "It's the truth, Clara. It always has been," the sunroom went silent. It was a silence so profound, it felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket. For maybe 30 seconds, I simply stood there. I didn't move a muscle. All I could process was the image, my sister, the woman who shared my childhood, and the man who was supposed to be my future, standing together as a unit against me. The betrayal wasn't a sudden action. It was a structure they had been secretly building in the dark, and I had just walked right into their finished house of lies. Michael found his voice first, a weak, desperate squeak. "Clara, please, let me explain. It's complicated. I cut him off, not with the yell, but with a gaze so cold it stopped him instantly. My focus was purely on Eleanor. He was merely the tool. She was the architect. "How long?" My voice was barely a whisper. I didn't need to ask what. I needed to know the depth of the deception. Eleanor, recovering her composure with frightening speed, crossed her arms. Her face hardened, shedding the last vestiges of her friendly sister facade. "Since last fall, before he even proposed to you." The air left my lungs. Last fall. That was when Michael started his late nights. That's when Eleanor started taking such a keen, intense interest in our wedding plans. They hadn't fallen in love behind my back. They had been planning their future while pretending to plan mine. You stood there. You helped me pick my dress. You held my hand when I cried happy tears about the future. You let me believe you were my maid of honor. You are my sister. Eleanor gave a shrug that was the single most heartless thing I had ever witnessed. "Michael and I tried to fight it, Clara, but what we have is real. It's inevitable." She glanced at Michael, who just stood there, eyes fixed on the floor, the coward. "Inevitable?" I stepped closer, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the incredible surge of adrenaline. "You took him after the proposal? You waited for the ring to be on my finger, for the invitations to be mailed? Was this some sort of sick game for you? Was my heartbreak the prize?" Her response was delivered with a dangerous calm. "Your heartbreak, Clara? You were barely paying attention. You were so wrapped up in your perfect life, you didn't see what was happening right under your nose. Frankly, Michael deserves someone who sees his potential, not someone obsessed with floral arrangements." That comment struck me not as mean, but as a calculated piece of cruelty. It was designed to diminish me, to make me feel small and deserving of this fate. But then, a terrifying thought clicked into place. Eleanor had always been competitive, but this felt like more than just stealing a fiancé. This felt like total annihilation. I remembered a conversation we had exactly a year ago. A massive, life-changing career opportunity had opened up for me. A senior role at a national media firm in a city 3 states away. I was thrilled. It was my dream job, the one I had worked 10 years for. I was in the final interview stage. "Eleanor," I said, the memory flooding back, sharp and painful. "The San Francisco opportunity last year. I was waiting for the final call. The firm suddenly pulled my application. They gave me this vague reason about internal restructuring. Do you remember?" She kept her gaze steady, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "Vaguely. I told you it was probably for the best. That city was too far away." "You told me that. But a few weeks later, Michael told me he had been given a similar offer, one he turned down because he wanted to stay near the family. That felt weird, but I pushed it aside." I paused, letting the implication hang in the suffocating air. "Did you have anything to do with that, Eleanor?" Her mask finally cracked open, revealing the true villain beneath. Her eyes glinted with cold, hard triumph. "Of course I did." Michael finally looked up. Confusion edged on his face. "What are you talking about, Ella?" Eleanor ignored him, talking only to me now, her voice dripping with years of hidden resentment. "That job was going to take you away. You would have left me here. Besides, Michael deserved that chance more than you. I simply made a phone call to a friend who happened to be on their hiring committee. I told them you were too emotionally volatile, that you had a habit of flaking on big projects. A simple rumor, and suddenly your dream job vanished." I stumbled back, leaning against the wall for support. The affair was a betrayal of love, but this was a betrayal of my life, a deliberate, cold-blooded effort to sabotage my future months before she even decided to publicly claim Michael. "You didn't just sleep with my fiancé," I articulated, the words like chips of ice. "You destroyed my career so you could keep me here, miserable. And then you stole the man I was going to marry. You wanted to make sure I had nothing left." Eleanor smiled, a full, utterly unrepentant smile. "We sisters always share, Clara. I just decided I deserved more of the good things." That moment was the end of Clara, the trusting sister. The person who stood there was a hollow shell, but within that emptiness, a spark ignited, a cold, steady, focused flame of justice. There would be no yelling, no pleading, just a deep, settled resolve. Eleanor wanted to play this game. She wanted to destroy my life brick by brick. Fine. But she didn't know the woman she had just created. I looked at Michael, who looked sickened, not by his actions, but by Eleanor's shocking confession. He was just a pawn. I looked back at Eleanor. "Enjoy your victory, sister. It's going to be the shortest one you've ever had." Then I turned my back on them both, walked out of that sunroom, out of the historic estate, and drove away from the wreckage of my old life. The tears I should have cried were replaced by a single powerful thought.
Eleanor did not just commit a crime against my heart, she committed a crime against my existence, and the only appropriate response was calculated, complete, and total justice.
I drove for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I didn't pull over and scream. My body was filled with a sterile, shocking stillness. All the chaos, the anger, the disbelief, the heartbreak, it was all trapped inside, compressed into a single, diamond-hard resolve. I had seen the monster my sister was. Now, I had to become something she wouldn't recognize. A strategist. My first move was to create a void. I didn't answer a single phone call. I ghosted every text message. For 72 hours, I went silent. The wedding was 3 months away, and I had to shut it down. I didn't send a mass email or make a weepy call to my mother. That would be messy. That would be emotional. And emotions were what Eleanor fed on. Instead, I used the efficiency Eleanor had taught me. I called the venue manager and told her the wedding was postponed indefinitely due to a sudden family-related emergency. I had paid the deposit in full. I simply walked away from the money. The caterer, the florist, the band all got the same concise, emotionless email. The event is canceled. Thank you for your time. Michael and Eleanor tried to contact me dozens of times. They showed up at my house. I just watched them from behind drawn blinds. 2 figures of pathetic desperation. They wanted to manage my reaction. They wanted me to be the predictable, weeping victim so they could administer their predictable, weak apologies. They wanted to control the narrative. I wasn't giving them 1 inch. My silence was my first weapon. During those days of isolation, the tears finally came. But they weren't the tears of a heartbroken fiancé. They were the tears of a woman mourning her sister. That was the ultimate loss. Michael was just a mistake I had nearly married. Eleanor was a decade and a half of shared life that had been revealed as a profound lie. When the pain finally receded, what was left was not sadness, but clarity. I sat down at my kitchen table with a notepad, and I began the cold, hard process of analysis. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was charting a path to justice. The question wasn't how to hurt them. It was how to erase the foundation of their happiness.
I started with Michael. His weakness was simple: status. He was a narcissist who thrived on being perceived as successful, driven, and destined for greatness. He would collapse the moment his reputation was ruined, not because he cared about me, but because he'd lose the admiration he craved. But my true target, the core of the problem, was Eleanor. Eleanor didn't care about people. She cared about power. And in her world, power wasn't just money. It was unassailable social standing and professional success. She was on the fast track to becoming a partner at her high-profile consulting firm, a position that came with immense wealth, influence, and the permanent ability to look down on others. She had worked her entire adult life, climbing over anyone necessary, including me with the San Francisco sabotage, to achieve this pinnacle. I wrote it down in a bold, unwavering script. Eleanor's value is her reputation and her firm's trust in her. To hurt them financially on the surface would be temporary. They could recover. To publicly expose the affair would be scandalous, but Eleanor might spin it as a passion, merely messy. But to destroy her career, to permanently shut down her future, that would be the true vengeance. That would be the systemic failure of the perfect life she had spent decades constructing. My new mission was clear. I had to find a secret so dark, so professionally damning that her firm wouldn't just fire her, they would have to disavow her entirely. I needed something that proved she wasn't just a terrible sister, but a risk to their multi-million-dollar business. I started digging. I accessed old emails and shared files, searching for anything unusual, any minor deviation in her professional conduct over the last 3 years. I wasn't looking for proof of her affair with Michael anymore. I was hunting for the ultimate secret that justified her cruel, calculated nature. I was searching for the lie that held the entire Eleanor persona together. My investigation began where Eleanor's professional life started, her firm. I couldn't just hack their servers, of course. My expertise was in market analysis and research, the quiet, persistent skill of finding the one needle in a digital haystack. I was good at pattern recognition, at spotting the thread that wasn't supposed to be there. I spent the next 3 weeks doing nothing but dissecting Eleanor's past. I reviewed old shared documents, social media posts, and even financial filings from the periphery of her life. Michael was irrelevant now. He was a distraction. All focus was on the structure of the lie that was my sister's identity. I started at her entry point into the consulting world 7 years ago. She had joined her prestigious firm straight out of her MBA program, having crushed a major consulting competition. I remember her telling me about that competition, a high-stakes project analyzing the merger of 2 massive tech companies. It had been her golden ticket.
But as I looked back at the details of that project, something nagged at me. Eleanor had always been sharp, but this analysis was considered genius at the time. It was the stuff of industry legends. I dug into the competition's records. I cross-referenced the names of the participants. That's when I found the first glitch in the matrix. A third name I hadn't expected. A man named Daniel. Daniel had been Eleanor's main competitor in the final round of the contest. I discovered that Daniel had abruptly withdrawn from the competition just days before the final presentation. His official reason? Serious family emergency. Vague. Too neat. I used a network of former classmates and colleagues, people Eleanor had been subtly dismissive of over the years, and managed to track Daniel down. I didn't tell him who I was, only that I was researching the integrity of that particular corporate contest. When I finally reached him, Daniel sounded defeated, tired, even after all those years. He confirmed the family emergency was a lie. He withdrew because 3 days before his final career-making presentation, all his data vanished. Not just deleted, but wiped clean from his local drive, his cloud backup, and his external storage. Every single document related to his groundbreaking analysis was gone. It was such a catastrophic failure, he couldn't rebuild the project in time, and his reputation took a massive, irreversible hit. He never pursued consulting again. I felt a cold rush of sickness. It wasn't just my career Eleanor had ruined, it was the life of a stranger, Daniel, to ensure her own path. But how? Eleanor wasn't a tech expert. I looked back at the shared family laptop we used during that period. She had asked me to set up an external server for her backup data. I am technically proficient, and I remember using a specific obscure file transfer protocol. I started running deep diagnostics on my old, unused server. Hours turned into days of relentless searching through lines of ancient code. Then I found it. Hidden deep within a complex, encrypted folder was a file that should have never existed. It wasn't a family photo.
It wasn't a college paper. It was Daniel's entire presentation. All his proprietary data, his revolutionary analysis, dated 24 hours before he withdrew from the contest. It had been covertly mirrored to my server, then deleted from his system using a remote access virus hidden in a seemingly innocent shared document. The file wasn't just a copy, it was the ultimate secret. I opened the file and compared it side by side with Eleanor's winning presentation from the competition. The structure was identical, the conclusions were identical. In some places, even the obscure internal phrasing was the same. Eleanor hadn't just cheated to win her job, she had committed industrial espionage and data theft, using her own sister's resources to frame a competitor and launch her own career. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. This was a deep-seated moral corruption that had been the foundation of her entire professional life. It meant every promotion, every bonus, every ounce of prestige she enjoyed was built on a lie and the ruin of another person. The woman wasn't just a fraud in romance, she was a fraud in her very career identity. I looked at the cold, hard proof, the digital fingerprints, the mirrored files, the timestamps, and realized I had found my weapon. This secret was not messy or emotional. It was irrefutable corporate criminality. It wasn't something she could charm her way out of. Her firm would not only fire her for this, they would face a massive liability if the truth came out publicly. They would have no choice but to shut down her entire career to protect themselves. My hands, which had been shaking with anger a few weeks ago, were now steady. I was no longer seeking emotional revenge. I was administering corporate justice. And Eleanor was about to face the consequences of the original sin that started her perfect, despicable life.
I had the ultimate secret, the digital proof of Eleanor's corporate crime. It was the atomic bomb of my revenge plan, but I knew I couldn't deploy it first. A swift, immediate explosion would be too clean. Eleanor and Michael would face the consequences together, circling the wagons, and maybe even finding a perverse kind of strength in their shared downfall. My goal was not just to destroy their lives, but to destroy their illusion of a perfect partnership. I had to make them turn on each other. I had to plant the seeds of paranoia and doubt, making them believe the ground was shifting beneath their feet long before the final collapse. This phase was all about psychological warfare. I called it the calculated strike. The first target was Michael's professional life. His entire ego was built on his expected promotion. I knew he was close to securing a huge account, a major client that would solidify his position and make him look indispensable to Eleanor. Using an anonymous proxy, I sent a single, untraceable email to the executive overseeing Michael's promotion review. The email contained no accusations, no names, and no emotional details about the affair. It contained only one very specific, technical piece of information, a carefully curated detail about a minor ethical lapse he had made 6 months ago on an expense report. Something small, easily forgivable, but which he had tried to bury. The note simply read, "Check the Q1 travel expenses for the Kingston bid. There's a discrepancy that suggests dishonesty regarding client entertainment funds." It was a small pinprick, but in the corporate world, questions about integrity are fatal. The executive wouldn't fire him, but they would immediately put the promotion on hold and launch a quiet internal audit. Within 48 hours, Michael was a mess. He didn't get fired, but the massive client account was suddenly handed over to a junior colleague. His review was indefinitely postponed. He wasn't told why, only that there were unforeseen issues with internal compliance. He immediately turned his rage and fear onto Eleanor. "This is your fault, Elle. You distracted me. I told you I needed to focus on this promotion, but you made everything about us." I imagined him yelling this over the phone, his fear of failure overwhelming his shallow affection for her.
Eleanor, still arrogant, would try to calm him, dismissing it as office politics. But the paranoia had been planted. Who knew about that expense report? Only Michael and one specific person in HR. The executive couldn't know unless someone told them. The second strike was aimed directly at Eleanor's social facade. She thrived on being the put-together sister, the superior one. I used my old knowledge of her bank accounts. Years ago, Eleanor had quietly borrowed a significant sum from our Aunt Martha to make a down payment on her luxury car, promising to pay her back with interest. Aunt Martha was sweet, trusting, and had never been fully repaid. Eleanor had simply ghosted the issue, counting on our aunt's timidity. I created a fake encrypted email address, posing as an anonymous concerned party. I forwarded Aunt Martha a PDS copy of the original loan agreement with a single neutral sentence. "Aunt Martha, you may want to check the statute of limitations on this. It seems Eleanor has moved on and forgotten this debt." The result was immediate chaos. Aunt Martha, scared but armed with the documentation, confronted Eleanor. The confrontation wasn't public, but it was viciously private. Eleanor couldn't afford a scandal with family money. It would reflect poorly on her success and could be traced back to her firm's background checks. She had to pay the debt immediately, a massive, unexpected financial hit that drained her savings. When Michael found out, the paranoia escalated. "First, my promotion. Now you're being blackmailed by family? Who is doing this, Eleanor? This isn't normal. Someone is after us." Eleanor, always confident in her own cleverness, insisted it was Michael's own incompetence and Aunt Martha's sudden greed. She couldn't fathom that an enemy could be so invisible, so precise. She couldn't conceive that the victim she left weeping weeks ago was orchestrating this cold, slow implosion. The beauty of the calculated strike was its subtlety. I didn't expose the core lie yet. I simply created consequences for their past minor misdeeds, making the retribution look like a string of bad luck, or worse, karma. They began to suspect everyone, colleagues, rivals, even casual acquaintances. But most importantly, they began to suspect each other. Michael, seeing Eleanor's expensive problems, began to question her judgment. Eleanor, watching Michael crumble, began to see him not as a prize, but as a liability. The silence of my revenge was deafening. I had pulled the strings from the shadows, and my sister and my former fiancé are now staring at the walls of the gilded cage they had built together, wondering whose fault it was that the cage was finally starting to burn. The stage was set for the final catastrophic revelation.
The emotion had done its job.
Michael and Eleanor were no longer a unified front. They were two people standing on shifting sand, desperately pointing fingers at the shadows. Now was the time for the final, catastrophic blow. The unveiling of the ultimate secret that would ensure the destruction of Eleanor's professional empire. I chose the perfect setting. The annual firm partnership gala. This was Eleanor's stage. She had maneuvered for years to attend this high society event, where she expected her mentor to introduce her as the firm's newest junior partner. It was the night she planned to solidify her success and show the world, and me, that she had won everything. I secured my own invitation through a distant, influential acquaintance, a subtle maneuver that kept me far from Eleanor's guest list radar. I walked into the ballroom wearing a dress that was simple but striking. I wasn't there to be noticed. I was there to deliver the verdict. The air was thick with champagne and the polished hum of ambition. I watched from the periphery as Eleanor took the stage next to the CEO, her face radiant with triumph. Michael, looking stressed and smaller than I remembered, stood in the front row, basking in her borrowed glory. The CEO began his speech, praising Eleanor's unparalleled drive and brilliant strategic mind. As he paused for dramatic effect, I walked calmly toward a discreetly positioned technical podium in the back of the room, a station typically used for presentations. No one noticed me immediately. My heart was pounding a rhythm of cold, hard resolve. I plugged a tiny, encrypted drive into the podium's laptop. I didn't need to speak a word. The truth would do the talking. On the massive, centralized screen above the CEO's head, where an announcement graphic should have appeared, a new file opened. It was titled Daniel K. Data Theft and Corporate Fraud Evidence. The file was a composite of my weeks of relentless work. The original crime, a screenshot of Eleanor's winning competition submission displayed side by side with the original time-stamped files stolen from Daniel K. 7 years ago. The evidence was irrefutable, a line-by-line comparison of their analyses. The digital fingerprints, a short, technical breakdown easily understood by the corporate crowd, showing the remote access virus and the mirroring protocol used to divert the data to my shared family server. It demonstrated a cold, calculated effort to steal and frame. The payoff? A slide showing Eleanor's rapid promotions and bonuses, all stemming directly from that genius analysis. The lie that built her entire career. Silence descended upon the ballroom like a physical weight. The CEO, whose back was to the screen, paused mid-sentence, sensing the shift in the room's energy. He turned slowly, his face draining of color as he grasped the gravity of the images.
Eleanor, whose name was about to be called, turned to look at the screen as well. For the first time in her life, I saw her composure shatter completely. The smug triumph was replaced by a look of absolute, sickening terror. She knew exactly what that file meant. It wasn't just a scandal, it was imprisonable fraud. Michael, standing below the stage, looked up at Eleanor, then at the screen, his face a mask of shock and bewilderment. He whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "What is that, Elle? What did you do?" The crowd, filled with sharp, calculating executives, didn't need further explanation. They were looking at a major lawsuit waiting to happen, a corporate liability, a fraudulent partner in their midst. I then pressed one final key. The screen transitioned to a simple text slide
directed solely at Michael. To Michael, betrayal is costly. The money you took from the Kingston bid was reported, and your integrity is ruined. But your true punishment is realizing you abandoned me for a woman whose entire existence was a crime. You didn't win a prize. You won a liability. You won the consequences.
With that, I pressed the final button. Delete. The massive file of evidence didn't vanish entirely. It was simultaneously sent to every registered attendee's professional email, along with the corporate compliance office. Just enough digital paper to ensure a full legal investigation would ensue. I looked directly at Eleanor, who was being physically pulled from the stage by her terrified CEO. Her eyes, filled with panicked fury, met mine. She tried to rush toward me, screaming something I couldn't hear. But security guards were already swarming the stage, trying to contain the chaos. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I felt a cold, deep satisfaction. I had used the truth as a weapon, and it was far more devastating than any physical force. Eleanor's life wasn't just inconvenienced, it was officially shut down. Her career, her reputation, her entire professional foundation was ripped out from beneath her in the most public, irrevocable way possible. I slipped out the nearest side door. The air outside was cool and clean. I had achieved justice. The perfect future she had stolen from me was irrelevant now, because the perfect future she had built for herself was gone forever.
I didn't wait to see the final, chaotic fallout of the gala. My task was complete, the evidence delivered, and the process of justice had been initiated. I drove home, not to celebrate, but to finally be still. Over the next few weeks, the news filtered to me in quiet, devastating pieces. Eleanor's world didn't just crumble, it was legally liquidated. The firm, facing massive reputation damage and potential liability from the Daniel K. fraud case, moved swiftly to disavow her. They not only fired her, but they pursued legal action to reclaim bonuses and compensation based on her fraudulently obtained position. Her professional contacts vanished. The high society friends who once fawned over her scattered like dust. She was facing criminal inquiries and a mountain of legal bills. The woman who valued power above everything else was utterly and completely powerless. And Michael, he was collateral damage. He wasn't involved in the 7-year-old corporate fraud, but his minor ethical lapse, the one I had exposed, was enough for his own company to make him a scapegoat in the subsequent fallout. He lost his job, and more painfully, he lost his status. He was left with nothing but his shame and the realization that the woman he betrayed me for was a monster whose entire life was a house of cards. I heard they had a vicious, screaming argument the day after the gala, and he walked away. He chose the lie, and in the end, the lie consumed them both. I felt none of the ecstatic triumph I thought I would. There was no gloating, no joy, only a vast, aching emptiness. I had won the war, but the battlefield was my own family history. I had achieved justice, but at the cost of my sister, my past, and a significant piece of my own innocence. I canceled my lease, sold my half of the family assets, and liquidated the last remnants of the life I had shared with them both. I wasn't running away. I was shedding a skin that no longer fit. I realized then that the revenge wasn't the goal. It was the wrenching, necessary surgery required to excise the cancer of betrayal from my life. The actual victory was the peace I found in the solitude that followed. In the quiet months that followed, as I slowly rebuilt my identity far from that toxic city, the lesson of this immense pain became clear. Betrayal leaves a scar on the soul that truth cannot entirely erase. I fought for justice, not to tear someone else down, but to reclaim my right to trust the world again. I learned that the strongest weapon you have isn't money or influence. It's the unflinching truth and the cold, hard integrity that your enemies lack. But I also learned that the old saying about blood being thicker than water is often just a dangerous fantasy. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, or kindness, or love. Those are earned. And sometimes the ultimate act of self-preservation is realizing that the people who share your DNA are the ones you must fight the hardest to escape. I didn't walk away with a new fiancé or a new high-powered job. I walked away with a profound solitude and the knowledge that I am strong enough to survive the absolute worst deception. My ultimate revenge wasn't Eleanor's professional downfall. It was my own recovery. It was the quiet, determined choice to keep my heart open to the good, even after watching my own sister prove that evil can wear a familiar, beautiful face. I am Clara, and I am finally free.